Like, it's taking forever to load. No, now it's basically done. Now we'll go to this React series 2. Now we have that, again, we don't have to commit again since I'm using Git extension on my terminal, which is sh. That is why I'll see Git master, because master is the branch which I am on. So I'll do this code dot so that I can open up the VS code, which is basically the default ID that I use. So now this is the boilerplate code which I got after executing that create react app command with npx. Npx stands for node package executable. Npm stands for node package manager. Npx stands for node package executable. If you remember, when you were using npm, we had to use npm I, right? So that's so if someone asks what is the difference between npm and npx, npx is node package executable, npm is your node package manager, which is used for managing the packages or managing the dependencies, external dependencies that you want to install in your application, right? With npm you have to install. With npx it will automatically install also, and will also execute as well. So this is the boilerplate code which we got in the index.js file. Again, we have the app component. We are wrapping it on the strict using react.strict mode. It is nothing but it is just like in JavaScript we use strict mode, right? That's how we use strict. Like we write use strict, right? Now when we use strict, now there are certain nuances added onto your JavaScript execution, like this keyword inside a function would behave differently, would be undefined. It does not matter, so it won't take the scope from which it is being called. So a lot of changes happen in strict mode. So JavaScript is executed in strict mode so that a lot of unpredictability that JavaScript adds can be mitigated, right? So we'll just remove. So that is what your react.strict mode is doing. Now inside that we are passing this app component, and here you can see we are doing the same thing like react dom.create root, which is used for creating the root, uh, which is used for creating the root. And once you've created the root, it will actually it will try to fetch the element ID. So basically here, if you go to the public folder, inside that you will be having index.html file. In this index.html file, you will be having the ID defined with root, right? So inside this element or this container, we will be pushing our React code. That is what the boilerplate code is doing, and this is how this basically, as you remember, that React basically has a virtual DOM concept. React interacts with virtual DOM. Now there is a package called React DOM which interacts with real DOM. React does not by itself interact with the real DOM, but there is a package called real DOM that interacts with the real DOM. So this is the package, and that is how we are interacting with the real DOM. We are just passing the element on which we want to create the root, and in this we'll push the React specific JSX or React specific code. So as explained, this is the boilerplate code we got, and when we run this, let's run this quickly. So how will be running this? Like we can go to package.json to see what all. So this is the scripts which you can execute. Rest of it is your for your information purposes, like what are the dependencies being installed, what is the name of the repository, what is the name of the application that you've kept in the package.json, what is the version, all these information you've kept. Now uh, now when it comes to uh, uh, when it comes to executing this application, we use these commands like start, build, test, and eject. So we'll run the start command, or we can just do npm start also. When we do npm start, it will basically invoke this script and it will start our development server. So one second, it has started our development server. Let me just close this and open it here. I hope it is visible to everyone. Yeah. So it has started in the development server, and this is the UI we get to see, right? Now we'll try to create a component. So now a question could be, you need to create give an example of a higher order component, right? You can explain the theory that it's a component that returns another component, right? But that is not how you should be explaining things. Simply, you can take an example of, let's say you want to implement a counter, right? Now there are two variations of counter you want to implement. One, so I'll remove this code. Now the first interview question is, that now this is an interview level implementation level question that I asked in the first session. I talked about the theoretical questions that can be asked in React. This is about implementation level questions that can be asked in React. So these are all implementation level questions, like create a increment counter that gets incremented on hover, and reuse the same logic on the click of the button. Right, so this is the question which you have to implement. So again, it says that you have to create a increment counter that it gets incremented when you hover on that button, and now you want to reuse the same logic on click of the button, right? On hover also you want the value to be incremented. There should be some value. On hover also you want that value to be incremented. Similarly, on click also you want the value to be incremented. When you want same type of operation on both the things, so it does not make sense to create two components, right? One easy way is we can create one increment component. We can create quickly a folder here. We can create a folder called components. Inside components, we can create a file called hover counter.jsx. We can also create a component called increment counter, button counter.jsx. Now these are the two components we have created, right? Now one way is like we write same logic in both the components. What is the logic? That you click on the button, you update the state, and the value gets updated, right? Now this is the same piece of logic which we'll be writing in both the places, right? Now this is one example that I'm giving you. There can be multiple examples which can be created or made on this design pattern, which adds reusability in the code, right? In case of your JavaScript normal, you can add reusability by creating functions, right? Whatever you feel is the code that can be reused across multiple places, you can keep it inside function and then use that function across multiple places, right? But here, since we don't have that liberty, we do have that liberty. I'm trying to say that we do have the liberty to create a higher order component that will keep our logic, and that logic can be reused across hover component, button counter component. So what we'll do is we will create import React from React const. This is button counter. So I'll simply use functional component at the moment. Export default button counter. Right. Inside this, I'll try to return a JSX. What is it? Sorry, import React from React. Sorry. Yeah, so here we'll try to return some JSX. So what do we want? We want a value, we want a button. So we'll give the button first. We'll add increment. Right now I just want to get rid of same logic at two places, right? I want to get rid of same logic at two places. One could be like I can add an on-click handler here. Anyways, I have to add that on-click handler, on-click, and we can define this handle click. Now handle click would be a function defined over here. Right? Now, when you click on this button, handle click should be called. Similar piece of logic we can write on. So let's save this here as well. We'll just change the name of the function, hover counter. Here also we'll copy this, we'll paste it over here. Now here we don't want to do it on click, we want to do it on hover, so we can do on mouse over. On mouse over. We want on mouse over. This handle click method has to be called. Now let's try to reuse this logic that we have written. We were thinking of writing it both the places, right? What are those two places? Hover counter and button counter. Now let's try to reuse that logic. So what we'll do is we'll create a higher order component that I'm talking about. So we'll call this as counter HOC or HOC counter, whatever nomenclature you or whatever naming convention you want to follow. So we generally use with keyword, with counter. So in React, we have with router. So when you do routing, you have a with router component. So that was way back when you were using class-based components. So in React router v5, I think there was v5 or v4. I don't remember the exact version, but there used to be a method called with counter, which used to pass the properties like the props like history prop and all those to the child to the component which it is trying to wrap. So what we'll do is we'll try to again import. So we'll try to copy the code, no, not this one. Like we'll try to import React from React. Once we have imported this, then we will do const with counter equals to this. Now this will take a component, as we said. We'll call this as a wrap component, and then we'll try to return this with counter default with counter, and now we can have return class the name of the component. We can say what name should we keep? Add increment extends React dot component. So what we are saying is we want to return this component. So this is a new component, right? Now in this, what we can do is we'll simply create a constructor, which is a requirement that we have to do, and we'll also have a render method, because render is supposed to be there whenever we use a class, whenever we create a class-based component. Now in this, we will try to call the wrap component, whatever the wrap component we have created, right? So now we'll try to write the duplicate logic. So we'll pass the props here. We'll use the super keyword. Now, what is the use of the super keyword? So since we are trying to maintain an inheritance here, since we are doing inheritance, how we are doing inheritance? We are using increments extends React.component. So when we are using extends, which means we are doing inheritance, that we want properties of React.component to be there in increment component. So now when we use constructor, we need to initialize our parent class constructor also. That is what we are doing using the super keyword. Now the super keyword may we'll pass the props, and then we'll create the state. That state would be counter. The value we'll keep at 0. Now what we will do is we will define one function also. So we'll define handle click. I'll make it as an arrow function so that I don't have to do binding. Otherwise, I have to do binding if I create a normal function. Now, what I'll do is I'll destructure my state or variable, this dot state, and I'll keep a counter here, and I'll set the state counter +1, right? So this is what we have done so far. Now we'll pass these properties that we have so far created. So what are those properties? One is state value. This dot state. What is that? Counter. To destructure it. Now so we'll pass a prop called value, which will be the value of the label after getting incremented. Value would be counter, and this handle click method. So we'll call this property as handle click, and we will pass that this handle click method, right? So we'll use this keyword, this dot handle click. Now once this is done, so what we are doing essentially is we are using this wrapped component that we are passing here, and inside this wrapped component we are passing two properties. One is value and the other one is handle click. Now let's leverage what we have written over here in this higher order component. This is how you create your higher order component. I hope there are no doubts, but yeah, let me just include. Let me just. So as I said, higher order components behave similar to higher order functions. So we'll just try calling button counter and hover counter using the higher order component that we've created. So what we will do is we will import. So we'll write with counter. So with counter is automatically imported. Now we'll pass this button counter. When we pass, so it returns the component, so that is being exported, right? Similarly, hover counter also we'll do the same. We'll wrap it inside with router, sorry, with counter, and we'll wrap it. Now we'll use these two components, hover counter and button counter, where we'll use it here, right? So we'll write button counter and hover counter. Now, once these two buttons are written, now we'll try to use this properties here. So what we'll do is handle click we are getting via props, right? So we'll expose the props, const handle click and value. We don't even need to use this in case of functional component. And here we'll pass the label also h1 value, right? Similar logic we need to use over there as well. So we can just copy paste over, because that's why do I do right? So one more thing. So here we'll remove this. We don't need this. We copy this because we don't need on-click event here. We need a mouse over event, and we'll get rid of this code because that has already been returned, right? So we'll pass the props here. So this is what we have done so far. Let's run the code. I think there is some error. It says cannot find file hover counter j6. Does that mean the corresponding component? So where are we getting this error? We are getting this error in the app.js6 file. So let's go there. So this component is not able to find because of this issue. The J6 refers the counter. I think there is still some error. No, it got compiled successfully. We don't see any buttons and anything. So I hope my VS Code is visible. No, I think it's not visible or what. I think let me share it again. So I think this is visible, but this piece of code is not visible. What is the issue? So it says wrap component is using incorrect casing, use Pascal case. Okay. So we are calling the wrap component in here. It has to be a wrap component, and this has to be this. Yeah. So I think UI is visible or not. Just give me 1 second. Mm, please present it again. If I share this, then this won't be visible. No, it's not visible. This is not visible. So this is the components we've created using now. If I click on hover, the number is getting incremented here. If I click on increment, this is also getting incremented. So this is what we've seen using higher order component. Uh, I think it is VS Code is not visible, right? Mm, I'm not sure if you guys were able to see my editor or not, because I explained the major chunk of the code without using that VS Code editor. Right now I'm on VS Code editor. I'm not sure if you guys are able to see it or not, because I'm not able to. Nobody's there in the stream yet. Uh, I'm not sure if you're able to see this also. Yeah, I hope it's visible now. So let me just, I think I didn't get any feedback loop, so I explained you without showing the code. Let me try to show it again because I didn't get any response from anyone that whether it is visible or not. I think I explained the part which was not visible. So because I was not getting any feedback also. Uh, Let me just quickly copy that code so that I can show you the what we have done so far. So just copy this. This is styles.css. CSS. So we are talking about a question called high. We are talking about like creating a increment counter that gets incremented on hover and using the same logic on the click of the button. So we have this functional app component we created, and we created two components: button counter and hover counter. Now, what button counter will do is when you click on the button, the counter would be incremented. Similarly, when you click on the hover counter, when you do not click, when you hover on the hover counter button, your counter would be incremented, right? So both the components share same piece of logic. So we'll move this to a higher order component, which we'll create just like now. So we'll create the components folder. Inside the components folder, we'll create files like inside here we'll create a file. We'll name it as button counter j6. One second. So let's just delete this folder. Slash button counter is now visible. This is the hover counter code we wrote. So nothing but now we will create one more component which is going to be with increment with counter, which is nothing but a higher order component G6. So here also I'll copy paste the code that I have written. So this is the with counter code. Now we are just trying to import hover counter and export hover counter. So hover counter mein what we are doing is we have created this with counter component. With counter component basically takes a hover counter as an argument and returns a new component that is being exposed at our app.js file. Inside the app.js file, let's just remove this. So inside our app.js file, we are having hover counter and button counter. We'll save these changes. Again, it is taking some time to load. This is taking time to load. Again, I'll explain you through the code. This is the working code which is working on my machine also. So again, what I did was I reused the logic which I wrote in button counter and hover counter component. So this is my with counter component, this is my hover counter, and this is my button counter. Now in the button counter, I'll just copy paste the code which I've written in the hover counter also. So button counter, mein what I've done is I'm getting props from handle, click, and value from with counter. So with counter is basically introducing a couple of properties which are being added into the button counter. So how is it introducing it? So this is the implementation of with counter in which we are passing the wrapped component, which can be button counter or hover counter, and then I'm returning one more component from it. So when I'm returning one more component from it, in this I'm trying to add a couple of properties. These are the properties which I'm trying to pass. So now button counter and hover counter will get access to these properties, which is again a reusable piece of code. So now these two components have the exact, since the exact piece of code logic has to be implemented in both the components. So we kind of mimic that using the higher order component. So that is the use of higher order component. And again, it's a very important design pattern when we want to implement something which is duplicate in nature. You can use the higher order component concept. So we've seen the higher order components, so we can easily construct higher order components in AI using the way we explained. Now we'll talk about I think not much time is left, so let's cover one more topic, which is a concept of prop drilling. Now, what is prop drilling? So prop drilling is nothing but when you call a component A, you pass certain properties. Now when you call a component, you're passing certain properties. Now it depends on what is the depth of that those components from which we are passing the properties. Let's say we have a initial component, we have a root component called A, from which we are calling another component B, from which another component we are calling C, from which another component we are calling D, and so on up to n, right? So since there are n number of components and we are passing some similar properties to all these components, when you are passing similar properties to all these components, so what will happen is in one now what will happen is, like, when you update the properties of like, let's say you update the properties at A, because A props that you're passing for A, it could be a state variable, right? So when it's a state variable and those properties you're passing to B, C, D up to n, uh, what will happen is, in that case, if there is a update in properties of A, all the components would be updated, right? So all the components would be updated. So when all the components would be updated, it will re-render all of them again and again. It will cause a re-render on all of them again and again. So this is the concept of prop drilling, and it basically shakes your entire uh, component tree. So it is encouraged to always avoid using such a deep nesting, because if there is a huge nesting, even if a prop is changing at the root component level, the entire tree would be refreshed. So for solving this, we can use two things. There are two solutions. One is we can use context API, and the other one that we can use is Redux. Now, what is context API and what is Redux? So I'll quickly show a small piece of code. So we'll create a, a file called theme context. Now here we'll write import from React. Now here we can just import React only. Now we'll write const theme context equals to create equals to react dot create context, and we can pass the initial data that we want to pass. So this is how you can create the context, right? Now once you've created the context, you can pass the data, like you can pass light theme you want, or maybe you want dark theme. It is up to you. Now once you've created a theme context, you need to define where this theme context should be there, right? So now at the app level, what we can do is we can import this theme context that we've created. So we need to export that theme context. So I don't think we are exporting it. So you can just do export. So it's a default, it's a named export that we are doing. So I think I covered it in the last session also, that what is the difference between default export and import named export. So this is an example of named export. Now how will we import the named export? We'll go back to the root component, which is app.js in this case. We'll use curly braces from dot slash, in like theme context. Here we will have theme context. Now we'll try to wrap these components with theme context dot provider. Now basically what we are doing, so this is also called React.children pattern. So we have wrapped theme context dot provider. We have wrapped button counter and a hover counter with theme context dot provider. Now this will have access to all the values that we are passing it to the provider. Let's say we create a some state variable here called theme, set theme. Uh, we write React use state. Initially it would be light. We can just import React here. Now once we have imported React, now what we'll do is we can create a button here also that will toggle, or a radio button or something you can create. So let's say we create a toggle button, toggle, which will toggle between themes. When you do an on click, set theme, we'll check if theme is light. We'll set it to dark, else it would be light. Let's add the. So I'm just giving you a pseudocode because right now I think it's taking a lot of time to load. Set theme, light here. Now this is what we have written. Now we can just do toggle theme. Now whatever the value of toggle theme would be, like whatever the value of theme would be, we'll be passing it as a value to this provider. So this provider will be getting the theme value, whatever the theme value would be, like light or dark, whatever it is. We can give colors also, dark or whatever color we want to give, right? Based on that, we can write the logic here in the button counter and hover counter. Now if you want to reuse that theme, so there are two ways. One is like we again import theme context text from dot slash theme context. Now inside here we can just use theme context dot consumer. Now it's not a preferred way, but it's an older way of doing it. Then you can wrap it inside theme context dot consumer. So there has to be a closing braces, right? So theme context dot consumer and theme context dot consumer. Now if I want to use that value, so we can simply get value we'll simply pass the value, and here One second. So this has to be closed. Closed. So we'll also have a curly braces here also, and we can simply return the set of values. So now there has to be a parent. So this has to be outside of it, and we can just give a parent to it, like this. So this is done, and we need to just have this curly braces. So there should be one more. Yeah, so this is what you will do. Now you can just have a theme here. Now whatever your theme is, based on that you can provide a wrapper. So this could be a div container. This can also be your div container. Now again here you can write a logic. If you can write a style here, if background color, you can set background color. If theme is light, then you can set it to white. Else you can set to dark gray or something. Right, so that's how you can, similarly you can change the color, and based on that you can do a lot of things. So that's how we used to use it, right? We're using theme context.consumer and theme context.provider. That is how we used to write the code for using context, right? We used to avoid, to get rid of prop drilling. Now to do the same thing using the new way, this is a way where which we used to do when we were having class-based component, not the functional components. Now if you want to do the same thing using the functional components, so what we'll use is we'll use a new hook called use context hook, which is much easier and more straightforward, I would say. React.useContext. Here we'll pass the we'll get the theme out of it from the context, and inside this context we'll pass the theme context. Right, now the same theme here, you can get rid of these two things. You can get rid of these also. You can get rid of this also. You can get rid of this also. Right, so here you can use the same theme. This is also much simpler and much convenient way of using the use context way of pulling out the context, and from the context we are just pulling out the theme. So that is about how you can use context and how you can get rid of the prop drilling issue, right? So that's about your context. Now we'll do one more question and then we'll try to wrap up because we are almost there on time. So let's say we'll go to big frontend.dev. Go to explore. We'll go to practice. We'll go to React coding problems. So let's say what we want to implement, use update effect. So it says use update effect, you have to implement. Now what does use update effect do is like it should work same as use effect. So you can use this application to solve React problems if you want to. So you need to. So this is again an interview question which can be asked to anyone. Like you need to implement use update effect. It should work the same way as use effect, but except that it skips running the callback on first render. It should skip running the callback on the first render. So what do we mean by this is like it should call the it should call the callback on subsequent renders, not on the first one. So whenever your component is mounted for the first time, it calls your use effect and it renders your component, right? So at that time we don't want the use effect to be called. That is what the problem is asking, right? So how to implement this? So you have this component, you just remove this. Now when you have this component, you want to get rid of, we'll call this use update effect hook. And when we call this use update effect hook, let's say we call this use update effect. Now use update effect takes the effect, which is a callback, and the list of dependencies. Now we can say like const, we will create some dependencies, data, set data, react.use state. Right, so We'll just write a console log here. In here, we'll pass this data as dependencies and set data. 1 second, no, not here. So now this will call this use. Now we write the code here. Now we want to make sure that we don't want to re-render. We don't want to call the use effect on the first render. We want to avoid calling the use effect on the first render. One way is like we can create a state variable that will make sure that we don't end up calling the use effect on the first render. But when we use the state variable, it will again increase one. It will. So whatever gain we will be getting from using use effect, use state, we'll be losing on the number of times it will cause a re-render, because it will again do a one subsequent re-render, right? When we update the state, it will do a subsequent re-render. We want to avoid that also. So why increase the re-render? So we can use a hook called useRef. So we'll use a hook called react.useRef. In this, we'll pass in the initial value as true, and this would be his first render. Now we'll call the use effect here. Use effect. Now here we'll have this thing, and then list of depths. Now we'll check if it's a first render dot current. If it is true, because whatever value you will pass to the user ref, it will be assigned to the current property or current key of the ref variable, right? So when you do this, this means that this is a first render, right? So when it is true, adding this negation to it will make it false. So it will go inside this if condition, and inside this if condition, we'll call the effect. We'll call this effect. Else we will uh, set is first render dot current to false, right? So that on subsequent re-render it can be called. So here, this is the piece of code that we were supposed to write here. Now we can just update this set data by doing some operation. Let's say we can add an on-click here. We can just do set data. In this, we can just write math.random. What is the issue? Right, so this is what we have done so far, right? Now whenever this, so on the first render it won't be called. Why it won't be called on the first render is because when this use update effect would be called, in which we are passing this function and then we are passing this dependency array. So what will happen is when you call this use update effect component, it will have this first render which will be true, and since it will try to execute this use effect call back, it will see here that it's a first render, it's a subsequent render, and first render dot current value would be true, negation of it would be false, and then it would invoke effect. When it will invoke effect, it won't invoke effect because on the first render it would be false, this would be false, so it would go into the else part and we'll set it as false, and then it will go outside the use effect. On the subsequent render, what will happen is this will become false and negation of it would be true, so that will then it will start executing effect, which means it will start executing whatever is written here. So if we try to submit this, I think we need to log in. So I'll just ignore it, but this is the logic which you can use to do it. Another way of doing it would be like you can create a state variable called first render, and then, but again, when you create a state variable, it will add one more re-render to your component. So again, that should be avoided, and that's why we went ahead with ref. And ref should be used wherever you want to make sure that the value persists across multiple re-renders. So that's about your use ref. And that's about how you can create this use update effect hook. Right, so I think I'm almost done with my set of content that I was supposed to cover. Let me see if there are any comments or any questions. I don't see any comments or any questions. So So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'm done from my side of content. So we were supposed to cover one or two more topics, and I'll see like if in the next session we're going to start Node. We'll try to cover that because of this some technical glitch. We were not able to make sure that our screen is shared around. In the next series, we'll talk about some important hooks, like how to create a custom hook for calling an API, how to or what is used callback, what is used memo, and all those things. So yeah, thanks everyone for uh, watching this tutorial, watching this series. Thank you.